Hey, it's Selwen here, back again with the class guides, taking a look on the Arms Warrior. And the Arms spec has always been about those big crits, with a methodical type gameplay surrounding Colossal Smash. Isn't a very spammy button smashing spec, but instead you carefully lay your abilities doing some management to then have these windows during Colossal Smash where you can go crazy until you reach the execute phase where you just go ham. Now, currently that is still the case, but not as much, depending on your build of course. Now is more about managing Colossus procs, a lot of rage management while trying to get as much mortal strikes as you can, buffed by shattered defenses. The Colossus burst window is still present to some extent, but is thrown out of the window when you put the Titanic Might talent into play, which we're gonna talk more in a bit. So before we get to talents, how does it play and what is it all about? Well, as you probably guessed, Arms is all about Colossus Smash. So what does it do? It's basically an average damaging ability, applying a debuff that increases your damage by a large percentage, which is defined by your mastery, for 8 seconds on a 20-second cooldown. So the basic idea is to have the debuff active at all possible times, so your damage is actually meaningful, and that's when you would use all of your abilities like Mortal Strikes, slams, and etc. Now, as you can probably already tell, an 8-second duration with a 20-second cooldown will be impossible to have a 100% uptime. So this is where your passive proc will come in, which is called the Tactician. What it does is for 0.75% of your rage spent, so from Mortal Strike, Slam, and basically all of your other abilities, will have a chance to reset the Colossus Smash cooldown along with Mortal Strike. That's essentially where the RNG from Arms will come in. More procs you get, the more uptime you will have, meaning you can just spam your abilities more frequently instead of just managing your rage until it's off cooldown, so you can actually start doing some damage. Now, all of that playstyle will be eliminated with Titanic Might, which is a godsend. It increases the duration of Colossus Smash debuff for a total of 16 seconds and the cooldown reduced to 12 seconds, meaning the debuff will never drop, even if you don't get procs. Now, another basic thing to keep in mind comes from your artifact rates, which is shattered defenses. After using a Colossus Smash, the damage of your next Mortal Strike or Execute is increased by 50%, plus higher crit chance from this other trait working in the same way. So you probably can already tell where this is going, right? Your gameplay will shift from this burst window based one to a more proc based, where you want to always combo a Colossus Smash with a Mortal Strike for those big hits. Mortal Strike wastes rage, so there's a chance for both of those abilities to get their cooldowns refreshed, so you can just repeat and just go on this cycle while filling in with slams until you get a proc or the cooldowns refresh naturally, without worrying at all about the Colossus Smash debuff uptime. That's the absolute basics of Arms play currently in Legion. Now, we'll get more into that, but first let's look at the talents, which can change the core of your gameplay. In your first set of talents you have Sweeping Strikes, which basically adds a cleave to your main abilities, Mortal Strike and Execute. Now this is pretty much the talents that you want to run the most whenever there's a chance to hit more than one target, like in dungeons, bosses like the Mistress in the Tomb, or even something like Sisters of the Moon, where you would only have a small window to cleave with the the owl. Even on something like that, it will still be more valuable to run with this talent than something like Dauntless, which only reduces the rage cost of your abilities by 10%. Whenever there's a chance to hit a secondary target, Sweeping Strikes will always prove superior. In terms of gameplay, there's really nothing that adds to it, besides some multi-Colossus Smash placement that we will talk more later. Overpower does add something new to your roster and in turn gameplay, a proc-based ability that pops up from any of your other abilities. It has a 60% chance to crit, so will crit basically all the time, and the damage is decent. Now, you don't really want to take this even in situations where you would take Dauntless, so pure single target fights like Goroth. The reason for that being is that overpower is just gonna mess with your gameplay and overall flow of the spec. Plus you want to waste the rage for the closest smash procs like I told before, and overpower is free. It can be useful for leveling or when you are newly dinged and are just fishing for procs and rage, but pretty much you're gonna change between Dauntless and sweeping strikes depending on the fight. Next is mostly quality of life and utility talents. Double time probably gonna be what you're gonna use the most. An extra use of charge is always good for practically any fight. Plus you can do some shenanigans like leaping away and charge back to get some extra rage, more on that later. Shockwave is particularly good if you need a stun for midi plus or adds, can help tremendously. Stormbolt does the same, but for single targets. In PvE I haven't found much uses for it. Third row will follow the same idea as the first talents. All are useful, but depending on the situation. Rend is what's performing really great right now in the Tomb, primarily on single target fights. And that's really where you would use it. Basically, it's a bleed dot but costs rage. So it's great for single target, but other than that makes it too difficult to use in multi-target situations, even if you want to multi-dot. Rage consumption and global cooldown uses will be too high to prove valuable. 2 targets would still work, but for 3 or more, you would be struggling to keep up. So for midi plus or fights like the Mistress, it's a no-go. Some dungeons are exceptions to this where trash packs aren't too large, but essentially that's your thinking behind it. Trauma and Avatar will prove superior for such fights. Trauma is a passive, it also adds bleed for 20% of the damage that you do with Slam, which is your filler, Whirlwinds, AoE, and Execute for 6 seconds. Now that damage adds up on top of each other, so it can technically work for any fight, especially if you aren't too experienced in arms, and is a good passive option overall, but if you're looking for the best damage on pure single target fights, again, it will be worse than Rend. Mostly because it's hard to keep up while you're busy using Closest Match and Mortal Strike, which does not refresh the dot. So it's just gonna drop constantly, losing a large portion of your DPS. In a Mythic Plus, however, or Mistress, which adds a lot of AoE, is a great choice because you're gonna Whirlwind quite a lot, so makes the bleed quite powerful. Avatar can also prove to be a great choice. Basically is an extra DPS cooldown, increasing your damage by 20% on 1.5 minutes cooldown, so synergizes well with Bladestorm. Now you can make some good uses out of it in the same situations such as Trauma, but timing will be key. So although can be good, can also be difficult to make it better than Trauma, if that makes sense, so I'll leave that up to you. Next row is again utility or quality of life talents. Bounding Stride is the most useful with the most frequent heroic leaps and movement speed, again for that charge shenanigan. Defensive Stance is fine for the damage reduction, but also reduces your damage done, which isn't good, but I guess you can use it if you really need the survivability. But even if you do, Second Wind will be the more viable choice, giving that little extra heal. Bounding Stride overall will be what you want to run with the most. Next we have Titanic Might, which we have talked about before, increasing the duration and reducing the cooldown of Closest Smash. I mean, I already said why this talent is your default choice. Basically it's allowing you to permanently take advantage of that damage increase that it provides. As for Fervor of Battle, it is an interesting choice, increasing the damage of your Whirlwinds to your primary target by 80%, so it's essentially replacing your filler ability, which is your Slam, by Whirlwind. So it's a viable option, although not the optimal one. It will basically provide you with more procs in theory, because Whirlwind costs more rage than Slam, 30 to 20, meaning higher chance for Closest Smash procs. So instead of having that easy Closest Smash uptime, you would rely on more consistent procs. Again, in theory. It's RNG after all. In the end, Titanic Might is the recommended and easiest choice, and don't be confused by the tooltip. Fervor of Battle still is a single target talent, not an AoE one, but again, it can still work. Mortal Combo is useless for PvE pretty much. There's really never a benefit to having 2 Mortal Strikes. You want to combo a Mortal Strike with Shattered Defenses, plus with a proc that you get, it's pretty much useless. Maybe for leveling or PvP. Deadly Calm in the next tier is basically useless also. I haven't mentioned your cooldowns, but the reducing of rage cost of your abilities during battle cry in most circumstances is just not needed. Whenever you pop all of your CDs, rage is never really an issue, so unless it's PvP or you are not using all of your CDs at the same time for whatever the reason, is really not that great. Focus Rage, it used to be your go-to talent actually, which I personally hated the playstyle, so he's no longer the default choice, thank god, but it can still work. Essentially the way it plays is before you actually use your Mortal Strike, you would empower it with this ability 3 times for that damage increase, and only then you would use it. It's out of your global cooldown, so you can use it whenever, basically at the same time as you are doing slams and etc. But in the end, it will consume way too much rage and can lead to clunking gameplay, in my opinion. Int for the Kill is definitely your go-to choice. Every time you use Colossus Smash, you get 10% haste for 8 seconds. It may seem like nothing or boring, but it's actually a pretty good boost. I haven't talked about stats as well, besides the little annotation, because they can shift dramatically depending on your gear, but usually the way it goes is Mastery, obviously, and then haste in terms of priority. Haste is pretty good to you, mostly for the global cooldown reductions, meaning you can put more abilities during battle cries windows, generate more rage, reduce Mortal Strike cooldown, cast time of Bladestorm, and overall do more in shorter amount of time. There is some soft caps or breakpoints with haste, which I will talk about in advanced section, but with the Colossus Smash procs with Tactician, this buff will stay active pretty much all the time, even if it only lasts for 8 seconds, making it a perfect choice with your overall playstyle. Lastly, you get some interesting choices. Right off the bat, anger management is really not that great for you. The reduction of cooldown on Bladestorm and Battle Cry is really not that needed, especially when you compare with the other choices. Again, maybe for PvP or some specific encounters, I found it to be pretty useful for Mage Tower, for an example, and maybe for some Mythic Pluses as well. General use though, not that great. So, Opportunity Strikes or Ravager. Those choices are gonna depend on your personal choice, as often is the case, but also gear. Opportunity Strikes is a completely passive option, basically adding this passive extra attack. Think a multi-strike back in WoD, doing some decent damage but giving you rage. Now there's some RNG behind this, as it is a chance to proc on any of your attacks. Ravager will replace your Bladestorm, doing about the same damage, but now just fire it and just stays in place, damaging instead of rooting you in a channel like Bladestorm. But very importantly, the cooldown gets reduced to 1 minute instead of 1.5 minutes and gives you rage every second. Also, since Ravager stays in place, with movement it can screw you up, like a nasty blood decay gripping the mobs away from it, or just the nature of the fight. So something to consider. Now in a general sense, you can choose either of those two, depending on what you prefer the most. Essentially, you are choosing between keeping Bladestorm or getting Ravager. In terms of DPS, they are pretty much even. Both have pros and cons in terms of gameplay. However, as you get the tier set bonus, things get a little complicated, because one advantage of Ravager is the cooldown. The 1 minute perfectly ties with your battle cry, meaning you can also combo your CDs easily. With Bladestorm might get a little bit awkward, but once you get your tier set bonus, one of the effects is that Colossus Smash is gonna reduce the cooldown of your Ravager or Bladestorm for 2 seconds. So they no longer will synergize their cooldown, instead Bladestorm and Battle Cry will. Then you enter this weird area where to make Ravager viable as before or as good as before, you would have to use something like Convergence of Fates that reduces the cooldown of your Battle Cry, meaning both of those abilities will share the cooldown once again, making it a very powerful choice indeed. In the end, I'll leave that choice up to you, but these are the things you need to to keep in mind when choosing between those two taunts, okay? In terms of single target and AoE, Ravager does function better in a Mythic Plus scenarios, in my opinion, regardless of what gear you are using, because you can just use it and keep using your other abilities like Whirlwind, Cleaving with Sweeping Strikes, etc. Something you can't do with Bladestorm. But again, that's my personal choice. Alright, so let's get into the gameplay. Your rotation, priorities, cooldowns, and all that good stuff. Most of the rotation I already briefly covered in the beginning, but the first basic thing that you always want to start up is charge. It gives you a little rage and you want to use it whenever possible. Now after, your priority number 1 is Colossal Smash, for all the reasons I said previously. Extra damage to the targets that will be easily kept up with Titanic Might, and in for the kill haste buffs, plus shattered defenses for your next Mortal Strike. But before, you want to use your Rend, which is your priority number 2, applying a bleed dot. It also costs rage, so has a chance to reset Colossal Smash. That's why you want to make sure when you use Rend or any other rage costing ability that your Colossal Smash is on cooldown so you don't lose out on any potential procs. Unless you have Shattered Defenses buff already active, okay? Only after you do your Mortal Strike, empowered by Shattered Defenses. Then you enter the cycle. If you got a Colossal Smash proc, you use it again followed by Mortal Strike. If you don't and is still on cooldown, enters your priority number 4, Slam. The damage isn't overly high, but it's just a filler, plus costs 20 rage, so it's giving you a nice chance for your proc. And you just do the same, Colossal Smash, Mortal Strike. It is indeed pretty simple, you just have to make sure you follow those rules and order. If you don't, your damage is gonna suffer a lot. The only things you need to keep in mind is to keep Colossal Smash on cooldown, keep Rend active, refreshing around 2.5 seconds or below, but not taking priority over Colossal Smash. If it's gonna drop, but Colossus is ready to be used, it takes priority anyway, so you don't lose procs. Once you get Shattered Defenses buff, you would refresh Rend, then Mortal Strike, which you want to use whenever it's available, preferably to consume Shattered Defenses, and just fill in with Slam when nothing else to click. Just don't mindlessly spam Slam, make sure you're gonna have enough Rage to refresh a Rend. For an example, Rage is a resource that you actually have to manage, so take that in consideration. As for your artifact ability, Warbreaker, it's a Colossal Smash AoE. In pure single target fights, you shouldn't concern yourself with it too much, and you should save it whenever you have multiple targets like at. However, if you are about to get a Mortal Strike and Colossal Smash is on cooldown and you have no Shattered Defenses buff, you can just use Warbreaker and then a Mortal Strike, because it functions in the same way, as in it gives you both Shattered Defenses and in for the kill, so you can use it to get them or refresh them if the RNG fails you. If you have overpowered Talented, you would use it after Mortal Strike, so priority number 5, and Fervor of Battle, you would just replace Slam with a Whirlwind. As for your cooldowns, where do you fit them? Well, one thing that you will notice when you start playing ARMS is that your damage is highly tied to your cooldowns, which can be good but also a bad thing. Luckily, they have a really short cooldown, and using them properly is key. Bladestorm or Ravager and Battle Cry. The way you want to use them is after you applied your Colossal Smash and Rends, you would pop them, and just keep your normal rotation. If you're using them mid-fights, make sure to always use the Colossal Smash before using it, so you can immediately go in for that Mortal Strike crit because of Battle Cry and benefit from the 10% haste from in for the kill, especially for your Bladestorm or Ravager, so they hit faster. Same follows for Rend. In the end, it's all about trying to get as many Colossal Smash Mortal Strike combos with Shattered Defenses as you can, while maintaining your dots and using your cooldowns appropriately. Now, execute phase. During the last 20% of HP on mobs, especially bosses, your thinking will shift a little bit, because the big old execute becomes available to use, and isn't just about spamming it, okay? Now, on those phases, a couple priorities will change. Rends will get on the back burner and you no longer need to refresh it, because using it is just wasting one potential global cooldown and rage that can be used with with an execute. Now, execute itself does quite a lot of damage, but depending how much rage you actually use, up to 40, but usually you don't want to save it until then and just use above 20 rage, because the idea during the execute is to still do that Colossus Smash Mortal Strike combo, but execute improves it even further with Executioner's Precision, adding a debuff on the target, increasing the damage of your next Mortal Strike by 75%, stacking 2 times to 150%, meaning during execute phases you would execute twice, then Colossus Smash, Mortal Strike, now empowered by not only shattered defenses, but with Executioner's Precision for this huge hit. Then just rinse and repeat. Your main goal is just to get as much as those powerful Mortal Strikes as you can. As for Colossus Smash, you generally only want to save it for that big Mortal Strike. Even though Execute can be also empowered by Shattered Defenses, you want to save it for Mortal Strike instead. If you happen to have the 2 stacks of the Execute debuff, but still no Colossus Smash, and remember that you can use Warbreaker to get the buff as well, you would keep executing, alright? No slams, no rends, no Mortal Strikes. Just execute until you get a Colossus Smash proc or the cooldown just refreshes, and then you would consume all of that goodness with a Mortal Strike. As for CDs, stays the same, but before using Battle Cries, you can indeed use a rend once again. Kinda weird, but it works, because now the dot will crit and it will be worthwhile using it again, especially if you're using Bladestorm and you won't be able to cast anything else during the duration. If it's Ravager, you will get more rage anyway, plus you can keep executing and etc. One more of its perks. Alright, so now that's all settled and done, AoE. Now AoE in ARMS can be a bit awkward because if you have all of your CDs, it can be amazingly high. Without them and without proper Legos can be rather weak. But if you are on a 2-target situation, your rotation shouldn't really change. Remember that you should have sweeping strikes. Just take in mind that you can multi-place your Colossus Smash. This way both targets will get the maximum damage you can pull off on your Mortal Strikes, and Execute's cleaves. Remember that Execute leaves the Mortal Strike buff, so even in cleave or AoE, take advantage of it for those big Mortal Strikes when they are about to die. As for Rend, you can probably keep it active easily on 2 targets if still talented. More than that might be stretching a little bit, like I said before. More targets than that, so 3 or more, is when you enter your Cleave and Whirlwind. And Warbreaker. Cleave hits are rather weak, but improves your Whirlwind damage by 20%, stacking 5 times per enemy hit. Meaning you always want to cast a Cleave before Whirlwind whenever it's off cooldown to get as much damage as possible. Pretty simple. If you have Trauma, it will also apply the dots, so it can keep some damage going. Now both Cleave and Whirlwinds are heavily resource hungry, as in costs a lot of rage, so you can't just spam it, at least not on 4 or 5 targets, so you still want to fill in with Colossus Smash and Mortal Strikes. Again, they can cleave, so it's fine. As for your cooldowns, Warbreaker, you want to use it as often as you can, just like Colossus Smash, and should be the first ability that you should click to immediately apply the damage increase before using anything else. If you have Ravager or Bladestorm and Battle Cry ready, well, click them and watch those numbers grow. Outside of CDs and Warbreaker, Cleaving and Whirlwind might not be enough to keep those numbers high. This is where your Lego legs that makes your heroic leap apply the Colossus Smash debuff would become really good. The only thing you can really do without the cooldowns is hope for Colossus procs and kinda multi-place them on as many targets as you can while you Cleave and Whirlwind, but can be quite clunky. So again, you are bound to your CDs or Legos to really pull amazing AoE numbers. If you are in a situation with about 8 or more targets, basically a lot of them, well, you can just Cleave and Whirlwind away, as Whirlwind crits refunds rage, so more targets you have, the more you can spam. So that covers your rotation and priorities. The only thing left to talk about is the more advanced-ish things about arms and just small tricks. To play arms more effectively, and as you get more comfortable with it, in the end will be all about management, both your rage and your abilities, primarily global cooldowns, by just preparing ahead, or just be prepared to what might potentially happen, like a Rend is coming off cooldown at the same time as a Colossus Smash, or managing procs. You have to learn to quickly act accordingly without messing anything up, by simply planning ahead, alright? Just spamming your slam sometimes might not be the best approach, as rage can actually get to be an issue in arms. That's one example. The other management is of course your cooldowns. You want to have a perfect control over them and when to use them, especially once you acquire the tier set bonus or the conversions of fates, like a nice Titan Forge, is gonna make their cooldowns more randomized. So you need to keep a constant eye on that and just being prepared again when they're about to be ready to be used and make the most out of them during their small duration. You always want to combo them both, but in AoE scenarios sometimes using them apart might be better, something for you to test out on your own character. As for tricks, again you can use your Warbreaker before Mortal Strike, even in single targets if you don't have any procs to maintain your buffs. Your charge can also be utilized to benefit you more than just movement. You can actually use it mid-fight to get rage, for an example. In the middle of a downtime phase, as in you getting no procs and you're just slamming your slam, you can literally leap away after you just hit with your weapon, just to make sure you get all that rage hit again, because remember that your rage comes from auto attacks. Then you just charge back for some extra. If you do it fast enough, it can benefit you. Small tidbit, but can improve your DPS. There's also some shenanigans you can pull off with Ravager and the tier set bonus, but I haven't gotten it in this specific character, so I can tell you on how to do it for sure. As for gear, arms is very gear dependent, be it tier sets or trinkets. This is a case where item level is really not important comparing to effects or stats. Again, stats might shift depending on your current situation, but mastery is king, followed by haste. The first breakpoint that you want to reach is to maintain 10 to 15% haste. That combined with in for the kill enables you to get 20 to 25% haste, which will amount to enabling you to fit a Bladestorm perfectly during a battle cry window, among other things that we have discussed. Even after getting the tier set bonus, maybe getting to the 20% haste or even more flat might be beneficial to you, even beyond breakpoints, because haste is really good to you either way. Again, simming will tell you for sure. As for other stats, crit seems to be the least beneficial, as you can get it in other sources. Strength or item level against versatility are pretty even, so make up your own conclusions on your own character with sims and all of that good stuff. Lastly, Legos. Your best in slots are of course the famous ring and the head. Both can help you tremendously in your single target DPS. The ring execute proc in terms of fitting in your normal rotation would just replace your Mortal Strike, and you just want to use it as fast as possible, making sure you don't miss out on any other potential proc. As for the head, there's really nothing for you to be concerned about. As most other Legos, the gloves can help you with your rage issues, and the legs we have already discussed, and the others, like the head, are pretty much straightforward. As for add-ons, having something like weak auras or tell me when to track your dots, cooldowns and procs can also help you, as well as setting some cooldown macros that you might check in the description if you want to just copy and paste and just use it for yourself. So guys, that basically covers it all. As always, I hope it was helpful to you. Like and subscribe for more videos. Have a fantastic day everyone, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.